by the time you see this, it will be Christmas Eve, or perhaps later, if you're coming later than Christmas Eve. I watch a lot of Christmas stuff in the middle of the summer, so, I'm right there with you. This year's story is another one from G.F. Munford's Ghosts and Legends of South Somerset, which was originally published in 1922, so 100 years old this year. I will link last year's Christmas story wherever links can happen. It'll be down in the description, or there'll be some kind of button thing somewhere. I'm still getting my head around the whole thing here. So I am afraid to destroy the romance somewhat. I'm reading from an iPad, so you may get a little buttercup glow under my chin as we read, which might add to or detract from the festive, spooky atmosphere. So without further ado, the Ghost of Sandy Road. I'm telling this story as it was told to me by an old inhabitant of the neighbourhood. In the year 1851, the latter part of the month of November, I had occasion to visit the neighbourhood of Ham Hill. Business keeping me longer than I expected, it was rather late at night when I left Stoke to return to Crewkerne, where I was staying. That night I shall never forget, for more than one reason. I was alone and on foot. The rain fell literally in sheets. The wind was as violent as if it had madly resolved upon throwing everything into chaotic confusion. Darkness put on its blackest mantle to be in dreary conformity with its colleagues, wind and rain. I shall always remember the hurried way in which I scrambled and shuffled along the solitary road, trembling at every blast of wind lest it should crush out my existence by the fall of a tree, wading through water up to my knees, and occasionally tripping over large stones and coming into unpleasant contact with the hedge. In this way, I journeyed for 3 or 4 miles until I arrived at a point about midway between West Chinook and Crewkerne, called Sandy Road, I believe. It was here that I met with what I think a remarkable adventure. At the point to which I allude, the road dipped into a small valley. Somehow or other, I know not how, the darkness became less intense, but the wind and rain wore even more furious than ever, and the water ran swiftly down the road, ankle deep. It was then that I became conscious that I was not alone. For immediately in front of me I saw what appeared to be a woman seated in the middle of the road. I halted. The light around me brightened into a kind of moonlight halo, and I plainly saw that the figure was that of a young woman. And, what was more remarkable, a young woman in her nightdress. Long and dark hair, strikingly contrasting with a pale and anxious-looking face, hung in tresses over her naked shoulders, and the expression of her countenance was the wildest and most vacant I ever saw or ever wish to see again. I stood for a moment as motionless as a statue, and while my eyes were fixed upon that extraordinary figure, she industriously began to comb her hair, and I fancy, but perhaps that was only fancy, for the wind was roaring fearfully, I heard a feeble, plaintive voice say, "Oh, I am sure he is coming." I did not then believe in ghosts, but 1,000 thoughts swirled around my brain with lightning speed. What on earth could a woman's object be in thus exposing herself to the violence of that wild night, and in such a lonely place, and so far away from human habitation? And in her nightdress too! Could it be that she was insane and had escaped from confinement? Or was she a somnambulist? I could find no answer to my own questions. It was mystery all. Summoning to my aid all the courage I could muster, I resolved upon addressing the figure, although I had not the slightest idea of what I was going to say. Walking around it, I managed to stammer out, "My good woman," when the belief I had up to that time endeavoured to stifle came upon me with full force. As I just said now, The wind and rain raged more furiously than ever. But the wind had no effect upon that long flowing hair, nor upon that nightdress. Both were motionless, although I was nearly blown off my legs. Good God, I thought, it must be something supernatural. An electric sensation which I shall never forget, although it would be impossible to describe, stole over me. The blood tingled in my veins, and I could feel that my hat was being lifted off my head by the unwilling agency of my own hair. Afraid to face the figure any longer, I tore myself away at the top of my speed, which I did not relax until fairly out of breath. I'd no sooner left the figure than the darkness again became impenetrable. And whilst I ploughed through the slush, I thought I heard a woman's wailing voice borne along the boisterous wind. "Oh, why does he not come? Why does he not come?" But perhaps that was only fancy also. During the rest of that dreadful journey to Crewkerne I was unmolested. I said nothing about my adventure, not liking to be thought superstitious. And often have I endeavoured to persuade myself that I must have been deceived, and that my imagination was so disordered as to transform a common ignis fatuus into the figure I have attempted to describe. I doubtless should have tried thus to persuade myself up to the present time, had it not been for a casual conversation which I recently had with an old man, a native of the neighbourhood, on whose veracity I placed the utmost confidence. I will, as nearly as possible, tell his tale as I had it told to me, in the most simple language, but with the deepest earnestness, and evidently with a strong conviction of its truth. I passed along Sandy Road in the company of my aged friend, and he was the first to whom I revealed my extraordinary adventure in 1851. I no sooner related it than he told me a tale which was a key to unlock the mystery hitherto to me impenetrable, and which thoroughly converted me to the belief in theories I had always regarded as superstitions. The place I pointed to was the spot where I saw the apparition, opposite a small field which formerly was a piece of waste ground by the side of the road. He said was called Nell Clifford's Lake, from an incident which occurred in the latter part of the last century. He could remember nothing of the affair himself, but had heard his father, who personally knew the characters in the story, relate it scores of times. A well-to-do farmer named Abraham Clifford occupied land close by, and lived in a farmhouse, the site of which has since been converted into a brickyard. Abraham had a wife and an only child, a daughter named Ellen. Upon this daughter both father and mother fondly doted. In appearance and manners she was graceful and winning, and it was therefore no wonder that at the age of 20 she had many admirers. Amongst them was but one whom Ellen would recognise, and that was young Harry Gill, the son of a manufacturer living in an adjoining town. To make a long story short, Harry's wooing met with no opposition, and it was arranged that the young people should be married on the Christmas day of the year at which the story dates. This arrangement was known to one of Ellen's rejected suitors, a neighbouring farmer's son. I will not mention who, for there are many of the same name residing in the locality at the present time. He was a surly, covetous, ill-bred fellow, not at all the man for Nell. Often he did shake his clenched fist and grind his teeth at Harry when paying Nell one of his customary visits, and it was rumoured that on one occasion he was overheard to say that he would break the skull of Harry Gill before he should become Nell Clifford's husband. One night, it was but a month before Christmas, as Harry was returning home from Sandy Road, he was thrown from his horse and killed. He was picked up dead in the road next morning. Some supposed that he was accidentally thrown. Others would have it that he was murdered. There was no evidence to prove that foul play had been used. He had a severe fracture of his skull, but that might have been the result of his pitching upon a stone. When my informant had arrived at this stage of the story, he began thus to moralise. How uncertain are human appointments! Often when expecting some joyous event, something occurs which smashes to atom the cup of bliss, even while being raised to our lips. Promise, hope and probability lead us onwards until within the sight of the desired goal, when gloomy disappointment, their stern adversary, suddenly hurls its invisible and deadly shafts, killing all our hopes, blighting all our prospects, and plunging us headlong into the torrent of unrealisation, to be dashed against the rock of despair. And then, with a deep-drawn sigh, he said that now, like a good many others, had a cruel realisation of the truth of this, having emptied the cup of bitterness to its dregs. Her father, early in the morning, was told of the sad occurrence by one of his labourers who had helped to carry the lifeless body to the nearest house. The old man immediately informed his wife, and after a little consultation it was arranged that he should break the news to his daughter as gently as possible. Now, my girl, said he, as he was busily preparing the first meal of the day, I've heard some sad news this morning. Indeed, father? Her cheeks suddenly reddening as if anticipating some calamity to her lover. Has anything happened to Harry? Well, they tell me now he's fallen from his horse and is a little bit hurt. The old man was too cautious to break the news suddenly. Oh, I hope it's nothing serious, poor fellow, but I'm afraid that it is, as I had such a horrid dream last night. I fancied that Harry and I were in beautiful flower and fruit gardens, when all of a sudden the scene changed, and I was plunged into a swift stream of muddy water. I know not where I was being drifted, and when I awoke in terrible affright, I felt sure I should hear of something dreadful happening. Tears came into the old man's eyes as he saw the intense anxiety of his daughter. And he knew not how to break the fatal news. He turned his head away to hide his emotion, and abruptly left the room, saying that he would go out and make further inquiries. But that was only an excuse to get away, for he wished to spare, as long as he could, the agony of mind which he knew his daughter would undergo. He lingered about his farmyard, wondering whether he should ever have sufficient courage to reveal the whole, when he heard the distant clattering of horses' hoofs. Fearing it was someone hastening to convey the dreadful intelligence, he quickly went into the house and ran to the door, where he found Nell in eager readiness to receive the messenger. It was Harry's would-be rival, who had come expressly and in apparent haste. Without any regard for the feelings of the father or the daughter, he shouted in a brutal, taunting tone, and before he gave himself time to pull up his horse, "Have you heard, farmer, that your intended son-in-law, young Harry Gill, was thrown from his horse last night and picked up dead in the road this morning, dead as a stone?" Poor Nell! Although almost prepared for the worst, the shock was rendered doubly terrible by the taunting way in which it was conveyed by one whom she knew to be the deadly enemy of Harry. Raising her clasped hands, she exclaimed in the bitterness of her anguish, "Oh God, why hast thou been so cruel?" and fell senseless upon the ground. These were the last sane words that ever fell from the lips of Ellen Clifford. After a swoon of several hours, she awoke, not the promising and lovely girl she was the day before, but a drivelling and harmless idiot. Her physical powers were undermined, her mental faculties destroyed forever. For several days she was watched and nursed with the hope that her reason was only temporarily dethroned, but the watching and nursing and caressing were in vain. Day after day she wandered about the house, plaintively wondering why Harry did not come so early as she expected. But she knew why he did not come. he was building a house for them to live in. She would often go into the garden and pick some green twigs, which she would tie into small bundles, saying that they were flowers for their wedding. "That's the prettiest flower, and that is Harry's, is it not? This is very pretty too, and this is mine." The almost bare twigs she hung in her hair, and viewing herself in the looking glass, would say that she was sure that that would please Harry. Hour after hour and day after day she spent in momentary expectation of Harry's coming, but she was sure he would be there in a minute or two, and must prepare herself to receive him. Oh, she was so happy under the delusion. "Hark!" she would often say, "there's Harry coming," and would tell her father and mother that she must go and meet him. They used to indulge her in the fancy and allow her to go, for she was very harmless, poor child. She would go a little way and come back again disappointed, but still hopeful. She knew he would be there directly, and would then go to the glass and comb her hair, her favourite pastime. Thus a month passed, a dreary and sorrowful month to poor old Clifford and his wife, a month of expectation only to Nell. Christmas Eve came. It was a wild and dismal day. Rain had been falling for a week, and towards evening the wind had swollen from a plaintive whisper to a sweeping, howling hurricane. That day Nell spent as usual. Every day was alike to her. The rain and wind now told her that Harry was coming. She must go and meet him, for she heard his voice. It was about 6 o'clock in the evening, as dark as darkness could be, and old Abraham and his wife naturally put their veto upon the desire of their idiot daughter, and were compelled to use force to get her to bed. Poor Nell. It was the first time she had been checked, and it was the last. She was sure that somebody was hurting Harry, and she wanted to see who it was. She then sobbed herself to sleep, and was left alone. The rest of the tale is soon told. Early in the morning, she was missing. Her mother fancied that during the night she had heard the doors creaking, and attributed it to the wind. Both parents were naturally in great consternation, and summoned all the labourers to their assistance in search of the missing girl. It did not last long. Mrs. Clifford had a presentiment that her daughter had gone on the road which Harry used to come by, and she and her husband agreed to go that way. The rain had flooded the fields, and during the night the wind had shivered many a sturdy tree. "And," continued my informant, "when they came to the place where you saw the apparition, they found their daughter floating upon the water which had accumulated on the waste piece of ground. She had left her home in her nightdress, and her hand tightly grasped a hair comb. Her parents always said that Nell fell into the water whilst walking in her sleep to look for Harry, for she was too harmless to have wilfully put an end to her life. You must not fancy that you're the only one who has seen her ghost, as I have several times seen it myself. But there is one thing which you were spared the pain of listening to. In addition to that mysterious wailing voice, I heard, above the blast of the tempest, such wild, despairing shrieks as would pierce your very soul. 'My God, why hast thou been so cruel?' And then the shriek calmed into a wail, which was music compared to the other. The ghost, I believe, can be seen and heard every stormy night, but I do not know that it ever haunts the road when the weather is calm. After seeing what I have described, and after hearing what I have told, how could I any longer struggle against beliefs in ghosts?" Merry Christmas.